Hello, everybody. So just to start, we encourage everybody, if you got questions or if we're not clear on things, we want it to be interactive. Ask questions during the conversation. We definitely want to be conversational. If you guys want to get closer, all good. If not, I guess we'll start with an intro. Dave Norman, if you want to.
Hey guys, Dave Norman. I work for Telestream. I'm a principal sales engineer there, responsible for a lot of solutions designed for our strategic clients, both in the East and West Coast.
I'm Daniel Gonzales, Senior Solutions Architect at Levels Beyond, Solution Architect for the Reach Engine product line.
Mike Flathers, CTO at Aspera, responsible for a lot of our third-party integrations and helping people just in general integrate our technology.
My name is Brandon Potter. I'm Director of Post-Production at Fox Sports. So we'll open with a little video here to start, about a minute.
So you can't sit there and say, we're just going to ship 100,000 drives across the world and copy everything, and then we'll ship 100,000 drives back. And can we just use more feeds? Can we just transport more media? Can we just do less in country?
Yeah, and we're living in a world where people are able to find any clip that they want immediately, boom.
We really had to come up with the fastest and the quickest way to provide as much material for our editors in Los Angeles to see and edit with video so that they can cut a piece and within 24 hours have that piece make air, back in Russia. So you really try to figure out the best way to maximize your dollar. That's really where Aspera and file transfer comes in. At NAB in April, we got a text message from a friend that said that Aspera had just tested and had 100 terabytes of media transferred in 24 hours. We need to make this happen. It's not even an option to not have that much media move.
On paper, it's like, yeah, we can do this. Okay, now how are we going to do it? And then here lies the challenges in putting all these pieces together where we can move 1.9 petabytes of material to be able to write from 6,000 miles away, write those files, those growing files, baseband records, out of the Telestream encoders straight to storage in Los Angeles for editors to pull straight into their Premiere and edit on a 10-second delay was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's
So
something that
like,
hadn't been done before.
I don't get too geeky about Aspera consoles and watching file transfers, but it's nice to see things hit 100%, right? And then you sit there in day one of the tournament and it's working. And it's like, I don't know, I think I high-fived some random person. Yeah. I don't know, I was high-fiving anybody that came by.
That lingers. I'll be signing autographs outside. To preface this, our journey together with this specific solution started with the Men's World Cup in Russia. So and it's important to our history because that was almost a POC in a sense for the Women's World Cup in France. A lot of what we did, it just got better by the time we got there. And a lot of our workflows really didn't change too much by that point. But yeah, some of the challenges that we had to overcome, being a national broadcast in the U.S. was this whole idea of PAL, right? And a lot of our legacy systems back in the U.S. not being file agnostic. To start, our entire remote edit crew was back in Los Angeles, and all the media for the World Cups, both Russia and France, was generated on-site in country. So one of the major challenges that we had was, okay, great, how do we not move a small army of editors and producers and fly them in country for 2 months? I mean, it's just a crazy expense, and the technology exists today where we don't necessarily have to do that if we do it right. It was I don't want to downplay that. It was a massive challenge moving all that media for Russia alone. It was over a petabyte. I think combined between the two events was about 2 petabytes. And going down the list, providing access anywhere over unmanaged networks. Difficult when someone goes over and cuts fiber with a lawnmower when we're trying to get our job done. I mean, we did have redundancy in place, thankfully, but that was definitely a challenge. A colleague of mine, Dean Perrine, has this term that he uses, data gravity. That's great. We all want to move everything to the cloud, but our entire broadcast infrastructure, we have a lot of on-prem content. So we do a lot of stuff up there, but we have to get it back down somehow. So that's another major challenge, is working in this hybrid environment. And obviously leveraging cost-effective resources across the board for all these workflows. As I mentioned, the amount of content that we were archiving, you got to be able to search it, you got to be able to find it quickly, and it's a lot of media. So how do we maximize the time that we have there? And then the last point here is can we all get along? The vendors that we chose and the people that are sitting at this table, it was pretty incredible. There was no finger pointing. Everybody kind of stepped up to the plate, and the challenges that we saw, there was always something every day that came up for us to work together and kind of overcome these challenges. Is there anything that you guys wanted to kind of chat on?
I'll just maybe talk a little bit about operating over unmanaged networks, right? You never know what's going to happen. We'll talk about this a little bit further down in the presentation. But at each location in Moscow and in Paris as well, and we're going to focus mostly on Women's World Cup in Paris here. But when we were in Moscow, we actually had circuits would blow. When we had a 10 gigabit circuit, we'd actually push 10 gigabits through there. Boom, circuit would blow, and it wouldn't just blow for a few minutes. It would blow for like 2-3 hours at a time, and none of the network providers wanted to fess up to it. There was a local network provider there. Amazon didn't have a POP there, so had to go from Moscow to Frankfurt, Germany, and then into AWS infrastructure from there. But it was one of those things where we're 3-4 days maybe before tournament, and the circuit is popping. So again, collectively working together, we finally figured out if we pushed it about 9.6, 9.7 gigabits a second, it wouldn't pop. So there was some QoS stuff going on there. Nobody ever fessed up to it, but it stayed up the whole time once we stopped allowing a full 10 gigs through there. So that was kind of a challenge.
Yeah, and the international component also was interesting. You land, you're going through security briefing. There's tons of security protocols, and so you're like fish out of water off the plane, down the jetway, and it's like we run right to the IBC as soon as we get there, right? And so, making sure you're working with people that you can trust, rely upon, and aren't going to have this fingerprinting scenario, it's critically important. It's been just a phenomenal experience. The whole team, not just up here, but there's a whole cast of characters behind the scenes as well. So. I want to just echo that last bullet point. It's critically important.
Yeah, and then to set the stage a little bit, we've been so close. Again, if there's any questions and you guys want us to clarify anything as we go, we've been so close to these things for 2 years, something that we kind of take as we don't really think about. You guys might need an explanation, let us know. And to start, our main locations for the broadcast for all the World Cups, I guess we could start with Russia. We had the IBC, which is the host broadcaster, or the area where all this media is really being generated, and FIFA was basically handing off the feeds to us, SDI, to take, and it was our job to get it from there to wherever we needed to go. They did have their own MAM on site. We had to work around that for a number of reasons. It was really only for people that were on site, so we now had to then kind of create our own system of moving all this media and making it accessible, at least for archive immediately. And when it's time to shut down if a tournament's over, lights are out, right? We don't have that much time to archive things or put things to drive. Like when it's time to go and everyone wants to pull out cables, it's done. We got to have all that stuff backed up and it can't fail. So yeah, we had the main site in Russia, and then we had our entire edit facility back at our Los Angeles broadcast facility, where we had a number of studio shows there as well. But the main set and all the media that was generated was all on site. Same thing with Paris for the Women's World Cup. The IBC was in Paris. And our set was there, and we were dealing with kind of these large geographical areas. And then one of my colleagues, David Sobel, this is why we kind of played this video against my will. But he had the whole time, can we just do this? And it really pushed everybody to make things happen. That's just really where a lot of our challenges were. So this is kind of what I was talking about. This is where kind of let me use this laser pointer, cool. Everything was generated here, and then we were kind of get it back here. To Los Angeles to access. And the way we did that was we didn't move every single byte to on-prem storage to edit with in Los Angeles. We just made it presentable via a reach engine and searchable and on the backbone of the Telestream encoders and the fast integration with Aspera to move that stuff quickly. What that allowed us to do was select specific content, right, and then subclip content, what you need in your edit, and then immediately pull it down if it wasn't high priority content already moved to on-prem storage at Pico. And that's kind of this is kind of a top level overview of what we have going on here. I'll stand up. This is just pointing out the HLS proxies that we had made. Those were for all the growing records. That was another huge challenge. Our people in Los Angeles just needed to access media. These were live growing records. And we were actually, and something to clarify, we had a couple workflows. The fast, what we called Flathers, would how do we want to?
Aspera streaming.
Aspera streaming was our MES full bitrate 250 megabits per second with audio.
220 video.
Class 100, yeah.
And we were able to write that growing file as it was growing back to on-prem storage and Pico, and they were pulling that into the Premiere on sub-second, but Premiere could only handle around 10-second delay. So editors were actually editing with those high-priority live feeds immediately in their timeline, amongst having also having the ENG and all the high-value content accessible, on the storage or via Reach Engine to be able to search and for PAs to find their content and move it about. So that's the HLS proxy. It's presenting in the web space just the proxy version of the streaming file for people to take action, subclip on, and do what we need to do. And then something huge that we did for France that I'll let Mike talk a little bit about is this auto archive of all our media and all our content.
Yeah. So when we were in Moscow, it's happened with these high-profile live events. I mean, the events happen, a match ends, and then you have all this content you need to move because you haven't moved it all. You want to archive it all because the equipment that you have in place at a venue gets typically put on a ship, and you don't know what's going to happen. If it's going to ever make it, right? So in Moscow, what would happen is people would actually stay sometimes 7, 10, sometimes even 12 hours after the last match would end and push all this content up during the night. And so
we had what was our largest in one night? It was 124 terabytes.
Something like that, yeah. And so we, what we wanted to do is we thought, again with this, mantra of can we just archive all of that content in real time, such that within seconds of the match ending, that last match ending, that all the content's already archived. And we actually accommodated this, and we're able to do it and archived into the cloud. So in this case, AWS was used, so S3 was used, so directly into S3. That included, every bit of high-res content that was generated got put up there through this auto archive mechanism. And what it really entailed was the four companies, including Fox, right, to really work together to make sure that data flow, that the asset management system and Reach Engine actually, knew about, this auto archive content, that when things were kicked off, the Telestream Lives would actually, poke Aspera, poke us, and that we get so we can get these growing files started. And it all worked out beautifully, including HD content. Dave, what was the bit rate of the HD content? Was like 1.96 gigabits a second.
the UHD?
Something like
It's
that.
like
The
1.3
UHD,
gigabits a second.
Yeah, 1 point what?
It's 1.3.
1.3.
Right? They were ProRes HD, and so that was a real heavy lift to get up right after the end of the match. And we had redundant 10 gig circuits, but it was saturating that 10 gig circuit pretty well.
We had UHD as well.
We have a
too.
question.
That is the UHD.
Did you guys archive it at 1080p or was it at 720?
It was 1080p 50 AVC Intra 100, so it was actually 220 megabit per second video with audio complement around 250. And that was mezzanine record, native. There's no compression on that at all.
We had a select few feeds for every match that were UHD that we also archived, and that wasn't used too much for editing. It was just that will be accessed when we decide to broadcast 4K at some point.
And that was actually in addition. Good question. That was actually in addition to the live edits that that were going on in LA. So we're pushing multiple locations at once. We're pushing into AWS into US West 2 in Portland. I don't know, maybe Daniel can talk a little about the virus scanning and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, we did have the virus scan. I kind of forgot about that. So one of the challenges as well, we didn't even add it on here, but make sure that the content coming in to the broadcast facility was sanitized.
Russia's a cesspool for viruses when we went in there.
We heard
FYI.
France was even worse, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things we had to do, so everything was, as far as the storage goes, from a cloud object storage in S3 was in West 2, where we had really stood up for Russia. So we just kind of reused a lot of the technology that was already there and improved a lot of those virus scan processes. We scanned that content as soon as it hit the buckets from fast streaming, and still were able to make it available to editors almost immediately. So that was really cool to do.
And that's, well, now to kind of take it back a little bit. So the majority of all this content really was coming from these live feeds, which, I don't know, depending on what we were recording, between 4 hours and 8 hours long a piece. 54 records running at once, and that all kind of funneled through with the API integration with Aspera through the Telestream encoders. So each encoder had, on the HD, on the 1080 encoder side, we had 4 inputs that was then writing a local HLS to the, writing the local file, NES files in the local machine as a backup onto our media grid storage that was on site. That was our on-prem storage remotely at the IBC in Russia and Moscow, and then also writing it simultaneously auto-archive to S3. So as soon as that feed was done, it was archived. So had they pulled out the lights from and the power, which they tend to do from under us after the event, everything was kind of wrapped up with a bow. And that was all, again, funneling through the Telestream encoders. Also using the Telestream line was the cloud, Norman, help me out here. Telestream Cloud, thank you.
Yeah, so what we implemented
transcoding.
initially was we had to trigger records, right? You have to have metadata that travel with those records, and you have to indicate this is, France versus Germany, whoever else may be playing. And there's a complement of metadata that needs to come up. So you're starting the record at 1, that's going to go till 5 p.m. There's an architecture slide we'll touch on in a little bit. There's some pictures that are going to come up, I think, first before that. But what happened was the schedule would kick off. That would fire off a number of processes all automatically that would notify Reach Engine that there was an event that would say, hey, here's how to consume the HLS proxy. If you're going to do a subclip, here's where the mezzanine media lives. And depending on at what time in the event it was, let's say it's live, we use resources where appropriate. So we would stay on-prem for anything live, because that's where the high-performance media storage was living. That's where the encoders were. It's where everything high-performance lived. And then as the match ended, we would then transition and follow the data. So processing actually would all happen up at AWS. So we would then be subclipping off of objects in S3 versus files that lived in storage on the media grid locally. So, and there's architecture diagrams that talk to a lot of that. So.
And the
Yeah, but even-
HLS, right? The HLS proxies as well.
Yeah, even the HLS proxy, because that was something we flipped to here with
we wrapped
Telestream
at
Cloud.
the end,
Is
that's right.
as Potter was mentioning, these are 4-hour files, 4 6-hour files. So if we want to kind of convert that HLS into just a MP4 proxy that somebody can do proxy editing with even later, it's time consuming to take that high res and go back and re-encode to an
Transcode,
MP4, down in Paris. So following the data mantra, Reach Engine really knew where every file was at any given point. So we were able to use and leverage Telestream Cloud to flip those HLSs to MP4s in 10 minutes or
Single-digit
something?
minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it
was-
was just a rewrap process.
yeah, so it took a 4-hour.
Took the compressed frames and just shoved them into an MP4.
Yep.
Any questions so far? Anything? Clarification? Okay, cool. This is kind of the air traffic control for our media file system. In the middle here, you've got kind of what's happening here is the scheduler. This is all scheduling and adding the metadata to all the records, so it can then be handed off to Reach Engine to be searched, right, and then create the HLS or proxies for all their media. Some EVS gear and stuff, that's all for replay and playback, that's also in there as backup. But that's really, this whole area is really what you just see us monitoring the Telestream encoders and all the feeds to make sure nothing drops out, no one routes bars or does anything silly, whatnot. More challenges.
So as we work together, we're what was it? We all got together a few months before the event in Moscow, right? To kind of put all
Staging
this
in
stuff
Charlotte.
together.
Right.
Now, in all honesty, we all had our pieces that we had worked on. We had this integration with Lightspeed Live that's a whole other story that Dave and I could talk about. But the fact of the matter is, we all came together, and like Brandon said, we tried to really make sure that there was no finger pointing going on. We were up at all hours of the night because at first we were in Moscow, right, and then they had every people in the U.S. and you can imagine the crazy times we had to have sync calls and that kind of thing. But we kind of just rolled up our sleeves together and put it together. And when I talk about the integration, some of the challenges I like to really bring up is optimize. We had to make sure that we started off not trying to take over the world, but starting off with doing what we can and then optimize, get better performance, and we ended up being able to do everything pretty much in real time. And that in application feedback, a lot of times you'll see these type of workflows. Now, sometimes watch folder workflows are necessary, but I like to say only necessary if there's no other option, there's no direct integration option, because that in-application feedback where you can actually feed something that goes wrong all the way back up through cross-company application stacks, and into so the Lightspeed Live would know when something goes wrong with the transfer, or that that our transfer would know if something went wrong, poking reach engine or something like that. So you provide that in application feedback. This bespoke beware is just kind of a term that we kind of like to use. It's much better to have things tightly integrated as opposed to these different components you kind of throw together that were never really designed to work together. Then expect the unexpected. We mentioned what happened in Moscow.
He was about 6 inches away from becoming a billionaire.
So Daniel was too. So I'll let someone else talk here. Go tell what happened.
Somebody was doing some construction on the roof there and almost fell through the roof on Mr. Flathers over here. Back to this is just some examples, I guess.
That metal bar that you see, that literally fell through like right behind Daniel and I.
kind of
I mean, you can feel the breeze coming down.
Those are some umbrellas in the machine room.
We had
You could probably infer what's happening there.
an unplanned indoor
No
rain
bueno.
shower.
On top of any other technical things that we were dealing with. But no, and one thing I want to say is that we've been focusing on is how everyone kind of stepped up to the plate here. This was Russia. It was almost a POC in a sense, and we did our due diligence. We had a whole staging area in Charlotte in our Fox Sports broadcast facility out there. What ended up happening was the initial vendor that we had for the encoders could not last minute while we were in Charlotte realize they could not make AVCI. So Dave Norman, I think he was on a mountain snowboarding, answered a phone call, and then kind of the rest is history with Mike Flathers and doing this tight integration, as well as some other things. We had a vendor also in the 11th hour back out for the scheduling tool, and then Telestream came up and made, in under 2 or 3 months, you guys came up with a solution and provided an application that could control all the encoders, enter all the metadata, fire, start and stop records, which is pretty incredible because we had nothing.
Yeah,
and it was really at NAB when the, which was a couple months before the event started, where you guys put this together. So it was scary for us. There was some stuff that was being deployed that has never seen production time, light of the day, while we were in Russia, and somehow it all came together. And obviously Paris was a year later a much easier time, I think, for all of us, and there was a lot less can we just moments.
And I want to touch on one thing Mike said real quick. So what we tried to do with all of these integrations, Levels, Telestream, and then including the Fox Sports team providing feedback, and you guys in the room are often building these, and you have operators that are responsible for making sure that the plant is in production, was remove opacity and provide as much detailed telemetry as possible. So when Levels was orchestrating Telestream tech, it was the process is running, it's at this percentage, and you would see it count up, as opposed to it just being a green box and then suddenly a blue box, right? And so that was a critical component to not having the watch folder model, which is we are super integrated. It's all API level integration. You can poke us. We'll tell you where we are in our process. We can poke them. They'll tell us where we are in their process. So we knew we were transferring at 250 megabits a second. And if we knew that came from Aspera, we were good. If it was at 10 megabits per second, we knew we had a problem. And so that was all built in, and that was all part of the initial design philosophy of making this very tangible and removing that level of opacity.
Yeah, it also goes like if there were, to what you were saying earlier, where if there was an issue, all of our platforms kind of knew where this issue was and we kind of made it so anyone could kind of pick up that error. So if we knew there was an error in the transfer, Reach could kind of come back and kind of kick it back, kick off again. So that was really good. And the idea here is we had a lot of people looking at this content, looking for this content that were not with us in Paris. So from even the Reach Engine standpoint, what kind of statuses could we give to those end users so that they could know, if I'm an editor, where is my file? You can easily see in Reach the report that, yeah, it's in transfer or it's transcoding still or something.
And I'd say we even created some new statuses on the fly, right? As we realized, hey, it'd be nice for them to know about this or that. We literally, and especially with Auto Archive, because Auto Archive was something new for Women's World Cup. There was kind of wouldn't it be nice to be able to do this? And it ended up being a reality and one of the most sought after features at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, we kind of tried to be very nimble, as well. I think we had a question.
Sorry, these were all host feeds. They're not your unilateral stuff. Is that, or was unilateral stuff
Any sort of feed, any even like net return, everything was recorded, but most of it was host broadcasting stuff that was being sent to us. But we had our own feeds, live views,
We
and
did the
different
native
things,
studio
contribution
stuff.
feeds.
Coffee Delone.
Did you host from the site or did you host from back in?
Yeah, we broadcasting back in Los Angeles for the actual broadcast that you're seeing, but the studio was on site. For Paris, we actually had all our playback for the studio shows in Los Angeles. The stage was in front of the Eiffel Tower, the control room and whatnot, and then we had the IBC that was 10 miles, a little bit less than 10 miles away. For Russia, the playback portion, although not next to the stage, it was still in country. But yeah, those are kind of the main locations. Good question. I forgot to clarify that. Yeah, but to point about monitoring, that's a huge one for us. Monitoring, seeing where everything is. People want to know where their file is at any time. It's kind of, my boss, Reed Kaufman, calls it the Domino's Pizza Tracker. At one point, we're gonna have end-to-end view of everything is the plan, right? Not just, oh, my file was now thrown over the fence into that thing. Okay, got it. Now let me pull up that thing. Okay, now it's out of that thing. Let me go to EVS. Is it there? Is it ready for playback? Okay, it's right. So that's kind of our goal, and that's what we really work towards.
Yeah, single pane of glass,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Really what we're after.
Yeah. Yeah, so umbrellas. So here's kind of a little bit more detailed view of kind of all the processes that we were talking about and the main kind of areas that we've got. And I can kind of walk you through this so it's not as opaque. So EVS was our main playback, and that was just native to whatever the host broadcaster codec was. In this case, it was AVCI 1080p 50, so that's how we spun those up. A lot of our, and another major challenge, like I mentioned, is our infrastructure is really set up to be 720 in Los Angeles. So dealing with PAL and a different codec and different resolution was a little bit different for us. It's agnostic in Premiere, but all the other systems that we use for playback and stuff are not. So we stood up this standalone EVS room and whatnot. So this is kind of the end destination for a lot of our features playing into the studio shows was really getting into EVS, at least for the post-production perspective. We talked about the Aspera fast stream. So there's a couple things to that. That's just basically writing a growing record from Paris or from Moscow back to our storage on-prem at Pico, and that's a growing record.
Hey, Brandon,
and same thing with HLS.
Maybe just say there. So the fast stream API is really it truly is a streaming API, and I'll just say we use stream, what we call stream to file. So Telestream Lightspeed Live would actually feed us a stream of data. It's not like we would grab a growing file and monitor. We'd literally get a byte stream coming in. So just to be clear, we actually support stream to file, which is what we use. We support stream to stream and file to stream as well. So stream to stream, of course, being stream of data in, stream of data out. Stream to file, stream of data in, file out, and then the reverse of that, file to a stream to consume it as a stream.
And then presented all that stuff into Reach Engine to be able to be searchable and proxy views and all that stuff. The scheduler, as I spoke about, that was just to kick off all the records and create the HL streams and create the MES files, the HD files and the UHD files that were getting back to us, or at least presented so people could subclip off them and then get that piece of media back to Los Angeles. We spoke about auto archive a little bit. Let's see here. Is there anything I missed over here, guys? Or any questions on kind of this grid and how we did things from the audience? No? Okay, cool. Dave, you have anything?
No, we start to peel back the onion a little bit in the next couple of slides so we can talk through kind of some of the tech stack a little further. So
Here you go. This is your
wheelhouse. This is actually a graphic from Moscow. So there was 22 of our hardware boxes in the IBC in Moscow, recording anywhere from 50 to 60 plus feeds at any given time locally, and then transiting that two places always, right, to AWS S3 for HLS proxy. So every single record had its HLS proxy transited to an S3 origin, and that was what was Levels Beyond was fronting to media managers. And so the additional piece of content that always was traveling back was the fast stream content to Pico. And then we additionally added auto archive for Paris, which was every mezzanine record being archived in real time up to S3. Both the Pico transit and the auto archive transit both leveraged native integrations with fast stream. So those were API driven loads of telemetry, so you knew exactly what was going on at a given time. You can see you have the editors on the right-hand side, and then you have the conduit, which is really transiting 6,000 miles, in this case for Moscow, and then the venue, which is IBC in that case. So next, building onto this, we built out the whole solution, and this starts to talk a little bit about the follow the data model. So Daniel, I'll hand this off to you. As the scheduler, again, would transition, would indicate that a feed was final, let's say, my example before 5 p.m., that match is over. What would happen is the auto archival system would then poke levels and say, hey, we're not live, and then you want to talk a little bit about what happens after that. You fired off a ton of cloud processes at that point to make content available generically to everybody.
Yeah, so really following the data on this one, we would wind up getting part of the tight integration update from auto archive when auto archive was done streaming that file into S3. So during that entire time, you know, editors can be looking for content, or not editors, even PAs or producers would be creating clips. During this whole time, if we were still in transit, Reach Engine still was aware the source file is still in Paris. I can go to Paris and lift clips out of here. In the meantime, once we had the update from Aspera that it was done, we were able to start leveraging the cloud process for cloud transcoding on the Telestream cloud side. We were able to automatically send content down to Pico based on certain metadata fields if it was required. So using the metadata that was coming in from the scheduler would kind of let us know, hey, this type of content has these particular tags on it. It needs to go back to Pico ASAP, or the rest of them will just kind of stay there in AWS. And we're just monitoring where it goes. Now, even when we were sent content down to Pico, to the Pico lot, Reach Engine was still aware of that movement as well, and picking up files, because we even had the finished files coming back into Reach, which was the only, I think, watch folder we had. We had one set of watch folders, and after that, it was all an integrated solution with Aspera and Vantage.
Yeah, our goal was to, if something was already sent back to Pico, to not have to redownload. If somebody went to go pull that content, it would pull to where it was closest. So if they were trying to edit off on-prem storage, it was already there, it wouldn't go and then try to re-download it. So that's what levels did it.
There's another Aspera conduit here, Mike. Maybe you can talk to this because I think this is interesting. So we actually were traveling the HLS proxies. Every fragment we would push. Traditionally, you push that over HTTP, right? As you know, that's a TCP protocol, and we're traveling vast distances from Paris or from Moscow to US West 2, because that was our origin. And that can cause some latency problems, and you can have some retries, and TCP requires an ACK back, right? So what we decided to do was forego pushing the traditional model over HTTP and actually implemented an API-level integration with Aspera again, so we were actually pushing over the Aspera conduit. And you can talk maybe a little bit about that. That's what was pretty compelling, because it totally removed any chance of TCP biting us in a real way with the vast distances we were traveling.
Yeah, I mean, Dave explained it very well, but we would actually push all the HLS content. Of course, the M3U8 would have to update kind of in real time, be overwritten, and there was a little bit of logic that we had to put in there, working with the Telestream team to make sure that the M3U8 only referenced files that were already there, right, that had already been delivered. And then there was also the integration that happened with Reach Engine, the Reach Engine player, that allowed those HLS proxies to be played back directly out of S3. But we kept up with that. Those were 4 megabits a second. I think that were the low res.
5 for Russia and 3 for Paris.
Yeah. So okay, an average of 4.
Average of 4.
At any rate, we so that allowed. Well, I'll let Daniel talk about what that allowed people to do with the player, because that was actually really kind of cool how that all worked out.
Yeah, so any user was watching they could watch any of the feeds. How many we have at any given time? Like 22?
Upwards of 54 when it was all the crazy simultaneous matches.
So when we had like 3 matches overlapping, we had like 52 feeds heading into the system. Users were able to see any single one of those feeds at any given time in the Reach Engine player, be able to clip those switches, just creating a visual representation of this point in time, not really creating a brand new file, but being able to view that content as it's happening. What were we, sub 10 seconds, sub 2 seconds or something like that?
It was really a couple of seconds.
Immediately from here in LA, and create those clips that they may want to use in their Premiere edit bay. What would happen with that is we'd still have to go back to Paris to lift that file, which is where we would integrate with Vantage on that front, because that's where the file was growing still. So we we're able to tap into the growing file, create the 90-second clip that a PA was looking for, use Aspera to transfer that into West 2, where it would get virus scanned, and then transfer that back down to Pico for the editor, sanitized, ready to go. And I think we benchmarked that at about 3 minutes for that entire process. From the time the clip was requested to the time that it was ready to open in the NLE was about 3 minutes. Which
And
is
of
pretty
course,
amazing.
once the the event was over and things were closed, those clips would be generated out of the cloud, right? So again, follow the data, right? You generate wherever the high-res content happens to exist is where that conform got done.
So, and then some stats here. I think we went over it. This is specific to France. 790 terabytes generated to 54 simultaneous records. Those are all the SDI inputs that we in the Telestream encoders. The 10 seconds. So those were the growing records that we could access immediately, at least in Premiere, full met res contents. And again, that was just really a limitation to Premiere, not to what these guys put together. Just because you can't really work with a growing file in under 10 seconds there. A ton, 11,000 unique clips that were generated for the different users that were using Reach Engine.
Those are non-AI generated clips, so that's like real hands-on
Yep.
clips generated.
That's user engagement at that point.
There's a almost 250 megabit feed for each AVCI feed was the bit rate, right? So we had a 10 gig pipe, and like Flathers said, we happened to pop that thing, which was a good thing until we QoS'd it. Jen Pransky, one of the producers, bless her, she cut 1,600 pieces that are now accessible, via Reach. That wasn't the final destination; that was just for archive. But that's how many pieces that we really generated through this whole process, and were final pieces that eventually probably got delivered to air, most likely. I say most likely because I'm sure some of those got cut, but and then almost 624 terabytes of content that was auto archived. Yep.
What level of redundancy did you have in Paris?
That's a good question. With all these connections, that's probably better directed to our BDN folks.
Connectivity-wise or hardware-wise or everything? Hardware-wise, I know there was a couple of spare encoders that were thrown back there, and they had
we had
loads of spare boxes that we could use if need be.
Yeah, we did. We had I think 4 in Paris. We had 4 active Aspera servers and a couple of extra. And because of the way the workflows were done, it was actually a very, I'll say, relatively easy thing to kick things off and restart the whole workflows. Like Daniel said, because of an API level integration, something would go wrong, we could kind of kick things in the pants and get them going again. We didn't have to. We held. I mean, things held up like incredibly well. So we were pretty lucky. Right?
I didn't go into any of the backups on the Reach side either.
Yeah, all the hardware, we had enough Aspera servers and Telestream encoders. None of those really went down. Maybe, honestly, I don't remember. Maybe we had a problem with one of the channel SDI endpoints at some point.
Time code problem on one of them. We just swapped it out.
Yeah, there's little issues that cropped up here and there, but I mean, really, we did have more than enough hardware on all that front. We had a primary and backup Reach Engine gateway. We had plenty of Aspera servers and plenty of encoders there.
And then on the back end, on the AWS side, we had a cluster of Aspera servers there that were servicing everything, all pointing to common buckets, right? So there, we could, and what we did, because we don't really have time to get into this too deep, but depending on the instance types that you actually invoke in the cloud, and let's just use AWS as an example, right? You can maybe push with a single stream, maybe 2.4 gigabits a second, into there, into a single instance max. I mean, that's all out. And with multiple streams, you can maybe get 4 if you're lucky. And so our workflows really took advantage of, and this is integration with all the components, took advantage of, spreading that load across multiple servers to make sure that a single server is not trying to take everything at once, and that really helped out from a redundancy standpoint as well.
So I think we've got a couple minutes left here. But just to recap, the main components to make all of this work was the Aspera file acceleration on multiple fronts. We had Telestream also on multiple fronts with the encoders, SDI encoders, creating all these growing file records and doing all the transcodes with their Telestream Vantage on site. That was hardware for our transcodes, and we also had Telestream in the cloud. The record scheduler was another great Telestream product that came to fruition. And I don't know if you could buy. Is that now for sale? What came out of that? Maybe. Sorry, I put
We
him on
can
the
talk
spot.
after.
Yes.
I don't think the event creator is.
Event creator, I don't think
Right.
it's-
That's
getting
true.
away.
And then the Reach Engine, that was a web accessed MAM that was accessed anywhere, right? You just pull up a URL and you could see all your media and stream it immediately. But to that same point, we had a Premiere plugin that was a Premiere panel where you could access all the media and then pull it directly into your edit or into your project. And then, of course, AWS was our main cloud storage and running all the VPC and whatnot. And that's so David Sobel said, can we just? Boom, yes, we can, absolutely.
Much happier
we can.
person.
And look at, he's so happy. And then this is a great shot too, just to rub it in.
I think there's a
So we'll
play
scroll
there.
down one more
I think
for
that's the
We got one
video.
more.
Oh,
there you go, yeah. Fun
The
sizzle.
Americans begin their march towards history.
What heroics might we see?
Everybody knows that legends never die.
England will have a chance to tie. This is her World Cup moment. Saved by Mir!
The US won, by the way.
That's a wrap.
That was fun. We were all in different we were all spread all over the place during that.
Yeah.
But we were in.
Yeah.
We had
We were
a
all
lot
still
of fun
watching it.
chatting with each other.
Promoted
yeah.
in.
Yeah, so we'll be around. I mean, if there are any questions now, we'll take them. Otherwise, you guys can find us. Cool.
Any questions?
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you.